While we're waiting for them, I was asked to introduce myself, which gives me an outrageous opportunity. I teach here on this fine campus. I don't teach full-time any longer, but I did after Carol and I came home from Washington, D.C. I wanted to teach, and when former President George Dennison heard that, he knew I had an extensive teaching career and asked me if I would, if I was thinking about coming to Missoula, would I come here and see if I had anything to impart to the students. So I agreed to do that. And so for, I forget what it's been, I think 17 years. In fact, the Monday after I came home, I walked into a classroom here and started teaching. So I didn't shift gears too much, and I didn't forget too much, at least at that point, 17 years ago. And I taught two classes. I taught a number of classes, but two topics. One was kind of obligatory for every congressman that comes to teach or lecture anywhere. I was one of the few with a teaching degree that actually went back to teaching, but a lot of my former friends went to teaching. And as usual, they asked you to teach about the Congress, so I taught congressional processes, sort of from the worm's eye inside view of it. And you can make it pretty interesting if you're willing to tell the truth about it. And so the students seem to like it most of the time. And then the other classes that I spent a good deal more time on and had considerably more classes, and I see a couple of people here who sat in on all or part of those classes, was about the history of wilderness, but particularly from the 1980s until today. That's when, in Montana, the battles really got serious. Really, really serious, and sometimes dangerous, interestingly enough, because I'll talk about this, but Montanans have real principled beliefs about how you use the land. And just to polarize it a little bit, one side would use it entirely for harvest, virtually entirely for harvest. Not all of the land, but the land they wanted and found the gold in, or the silver, or the copper, or the timber, they wanted it. Okay, it's jobs, it's good for the economy. That was their position. And then on the other polarized side was environmentalists who, many of whom would prefer to simply drive industry out and preserve every last tree and the surface of every last foothill or mountain from mining. And pity the poor politician who's in the middle of that fight in Montana in the 1980s and 90s. Yes.
Let's center your mic up a little higher.
Sure. Where do you want it? Yeah, it is. Okay.
Is that better?
A lot better? Did you miss the whole first part of it? Got every word. Well, you're close. That's why. The poor buggers back there wondered when the show will start, you know. Are you okay back there now? Can you hear? Okay. And so I taught classes about that struggle, 30 years of struggle. And we'll do that a little today, this afternoon. Thanks a lot for being here. I appreciate it. This is a better crowd than I expected, and I know the Molly people are always glad to have a crowd, and I'm particularly pleased to see you all, including at least a dozen or more old friends or people that I've met in the past and don't get to see often enough. So thanks to all of you for being here. Let's do this. Let me go through the table of contents with you, sort of, for this lecture. I'm not doing it out of a book. It's just my recollections and readings. I'll have to do this pretty quickly for you because I want to go in two lectures, this one and then the one next Monday. I'll be gone Monday, but I hope you're here. I'm going to try to go through 30 years in a couple of hours, to 3 hours in both lectures. So, and we take time for questions. So, I'm going to leave stuff out and put stuff in. It's a sorting process when you're trying to do this much in a relatively short time. So I might talk a little fast. If I do, put up your hand, ask a question, tell me to slow down. First, we'll do very quickly the early history of the wild. And I'm going to do it in a minute, but I really am. I mean, what I want you to recall is the fear, the outright, straight-out fear that people had of wild places for many, many centuries, including after the settling of the United States. Then we'll do a little about early congressional legislation or congressional demand for regulations, which are the executive branch. The Congress doesn't regulate anything. They make a law, and the executive branch regulates based on the law. And sometimes the Congress just passes a law encouraging or requiring the executive branch to make regulations. But we'll do the early history of that. I'll just kind of rattle off some of the early predecessors of wilderness. That is legislation that came before. Then we'll take a look at that first wilderness bill and some of those first bills. And then I'm going to depart and talk to you a little bit about how Congress works. The only body that can designate land wilderness is the United States Congress. The courts can't do it. Presidents of the United States cannot do it by decree, by executive order. In 1964, when the Congress passed the first Wilderness Act, and they passed it under the encouragement and to some degree the tutelage of Lee Metcalf, Montana's senator, the first conservation senator in all of our lifetimes. It was Montana's Lee Metcalf. And he had a lot to do with the wilderness bill. He wrote himself and introduced a wilderness bill, I think 7 years before a serious bill was introduced. People really got into it, so he was trying to set the way. We'll go through that, and in that bill, the Congress decided that only it, in other words, only you, could declare wilderness through the Congress. I personally think you could write presidents until you were blue in the face saying we want to protect wilderness, and it never happened. But you write your congressman? I know people don't believe it. Trust me. You write your congressman, enough of you, and sometimes enough is 24, and you'll get the congressman's attention. Now, some congressmen don't read their mail, but what they do have is a process where their staff comes in and says, we got 200 letters on this over the past 3 months. There's something going on out there, Congressman. We got to get attentive to this. And so the Congress said only Congress can designate wilderness. Kept it to itself, the House and the Senate acting, and then a presidential signature, of course. And that's one of the important things that happened in that 1964 bill. So I want to talk to you about how Congress operates so that you understand how these bills get through, or in most cases, with regard to legislation, do not get through the Congress. People are somewhat critical of the Congress, as on occasion I am, because they say the Congress never says no to anybody. I can tell you from you and others having sent me there for 18 years, 9 consecutive terms, that the Congress says no to everybody. it passes about 5% of the bills that people request. So you spend your time telling people you can't do it. And it's not pleasant. But the Congress does work and does pass legislation, important legislation. I will accept this Congress from that statement. This Congress, be biased here, I'm just trying to look at it from the standpoint of all the Congresses I've lived through, served in, or read about. This Congress is terrible. And this is a terrible Congress. You can blame Democrats if you want. You blame Republicans if you want. It's terrible. And it pleases a lot of people that it doesn't get anything done. Pleases a lot of people, including a lot of constituents of those congressmen that are dragging their feet. After we go through a quick how Congress works, or maybe just before it, whichever I get to, I want to give you some wilderness facts. How many states have wilderness? How much wilderness is out there? How much wilderness is in Montana? What percent of the land is it? And so on. And then I will start on, but not finish, if I can get to this point, I will start on Montana's wilderness efforts of the past 30 years. That's where the struggle has been. The real struggle has been in the past 30 years, and the Wilderness Act, as you know, passed 20 years before that. Let me remember to say to you that that when I talk about wilderness, I'm talking about the highest protective designation possible on federal, in other words, your land. I'm not talking about state land. There's never been any private land taken for this purpose, so it's federal lands only, of which 1/3 of Montana is comprised. The primary steward on your behalf of those acres, of wilderness acres, is the Forest Service in Montana. There's a little BLM, Bureau of Land Management. So this discussion, this lecture is primarily about federal land, your land. And by the way, it belongs, the federal land in New York belongs as much to you as it does the governor of New York. And the federal land in Montana belongs as much to a fellow sleeping on the heating grate in downtown Manhattan tonight as it does to you. That's the way public land works. We all own it. It's a great American heritage. I see where some people want to return it, that's the wrong word, want the states to have it all. I think I have a proposal. I'm going to sidetrack. Here's the reason, see, I can't get through my lecture notes. I have a proposal. Let's not just get all the land to the states, all the federal land. Let's start small and see how it works. Let's just give them the highways first. That'll break them. That'll break them. It'll break Montana to have to take care of these highways. So let's just start with that. And then we'll worry about the Forest Service and BLM and other, right? I once tallied up the number of students in Wyoming who get national Pell Grants, federal Pell Grants, and federal student loans. It'd break Wyoming. Just so small. When I say break them, I don't mean they'd use all their budget. It would really damage them. Now, some people might say, well, then the federal government's doing too much. No, the federal government is doing basically its share of the burden of maintaining a civilized America, an educated America, an relatively environmentally sound America. Research. With the exception of Butte, my friends in Butte, nobody else can go to the moon. My friends in Butte could pull it off. I'm from Butte. When I'm over there, I always say, you know, not even Butte can go to the moon by itself. They say, the hell we can. So there's a place for all these governments, and all this land. Now, not necessarily in order. Let me try to get in order. The early wild, That thing about fear. You will remember Columbus's maps during Columbus's time. Shore of whatever it was, Scotland, Great Britain, Ireland, so forth, it'd be right here. Then you'd go out a way and there'd be big fish. And then you go out a little farther and it'd say, here be monsters. Yeah? And you remember some of the maps had the big two-headed dragons come out of the sea. Fear of the unknown. Absolute serious fear of it. And sailors, with the exception of a few Phoenicians and others, they wouldn't get out very far. They were very, very worried about it for a very long time. Even in the Bible, the good lands were the valleys where there was water and fruit and it was fertile. The dangerous lands were the mountains and the deserts. And if they were going to send you away for 40 days and 40 nights, they'd send you up on the mountain or out to the desert. That was as much punishment as they could deal out. That was capital offense. Even the Greeks and Romans disliked, at least, maybe feared, quote, the mountains and forests with their wild beasts, end quote. The wild for many centuries was the home of monsters. Centuries, right? You remember Greek mythology, the goat boy, the body of a goat and the neck and head of a boy. Now and then in America, what in the hell was on the other side of the Appalachians? Well, I don't know. Let's send some frontiersman out there. Get that Daniel Boone guy. He's dumb. He'll go. Send him out to see what he wouldn't have, but send him out to see. People wouldn't go over there. Didn't want to check it out. Thomas Jefferson sent his two friends up this way, and they were not fearful. Lewis and Clark were explorers and botanists, and they came up here, I think, without great trepidation and fear, except, for losing a boat or perhaps running into natives who, if they didn't know if they'd be harmless or what. And for the most part, the natives were quite congenial, as you recall, with Lewis and Clark. I suppose we can say that we no longer fear the wild and the unknown, right? We know what's out there, and we don't think there's anything strange out there. Now let me see the hands of those of you who believe in Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Yeah, there you go, here they go, see? Yeah, all right, well, you may be right. Hey, you may be right. But we still fear that stuff, right? Sasquatch is the new double-headed sea serpent. And I think I'm old enough now I won't be proven wrong, but we'll see. So we've had this thing going on for a long time in our minds, haven't we? We did move a little bit in Europe and in the United States. Nobody quite did it with the favor of the United States. And that is, while we were willing to go out there because we sort of lost the notion that there were monsters, we did think we had to conquer it. It was bad enough that the wild needed to be conquered. We had to charge at it. It had what we needed. We'd blow the place up to get it. We needed wood, and we certainly do. And I'll just come over here and tap on this. We still do. And we went into the wild and got it. We conquered it for our own needs. And for a long time, we indiscriminately shot the animals, slaughtered them, passenger pigeons, all gone. All gone. Last one died in, I think, 1921 or so. Buffalo, almost gone. We can thank some Montanans and a couple of other people in a couple of other states for saving the buffalo, but almost gone. So conquering, as in a war against the wild, was what we did in the beginning. And then we began to set about, we being the Congress, I wasn't there, we began to set about passing legislation to either tame this place, or after we realized we were not only taming the wild, but maybe we were harming it, and that we needed it too. We began to get that notion. In 1862, we passed the Homestead Act. You want to go west? We'll give you acres and a mule, and you fix it up and stay on it for a few years, and it's yours. In 1872, we passed a mining act that threw the green flag down and said, okay, miners, you go get them. And boy, did they ever. That was the same year, by the way, that we passed the Yellowstone National Park Act. And so while we were go get them, we also said, gee, look at this place. How about that? Let's protect that. Although let's not forget, we protected it because the main lobbyists were the railroads, and they wanted it as a destination point. But bless their hearts, it was protected. 1906, I've got more, but let me jump. 1906, we passed the Antiquities Act. And the Antiquities Act said presidents, if a place is in danger or has particular qualities, a president can declare it protected. And we now know they have national monument status. Some places that are wilderness were first protected by a president just reaching out on his own. Haven't had female presidents yet, so on his own. And I see a woman back there shaking her fist like, we're next. But reach out on his own and say, this place deserves protection. It's a national monument. Glacier Bay, Alaska, the Grand Canyon. So it was a wonderful act. It's still in effect, and presidents still catch hell whenever they do it. The Congress, particularly more conservative members of Congress, used to be conservationists. That's flipped. Now conservative members of Congress who are strongly conservative are against federal designations. Liberal members of Congress want to see it. So that's flipped in, just a little more than one lifetime. Created a national park system, organized the national park system, passed a Fish and Wildlife Act in the 1950s. We began to worry a lot about the forests in the 1950s because they had been significantly, in some places, overcut. And we had forest acts like the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, which I think passed just at the time that Jack Kennedy took office in the White House. Had outdoor recreation acts. And then in 1964, after 12 years of trying, and I think, I'm not sure of this number, I think I'm right. After 12 years of trying and 60 bills, 60 pieces of legislation, the act was finally drawn to the support around what the Congress would support. And in '64, the act passed. Metcalf had started about 8 or 9 years earlier in getting the Congress to think about wilderness. He put in the very first Wilderness Act, which I'm told he wrote himself. Having served in the Congress, but not being a lawyer, it's stunning to me that somebody could write their own legislation, because most of us just send it off to the Congressional Research Service, tell them what we want, meet with them 4 or 5 times, they draw it up, we change it. Most of us had a lawyer on the staff. We'd fit it and whatnot, send it back to Congressional Research Service, they'd polish it up and bang. But Lee Metcalf wrote legislation flying back from Montana on a plane. And he was a wizard, I think. I know lawyers in Congress don't write their own legislation. But anyhow, one of those was the early Wilderness Act. When the Wilderness Act passed, let me see, I want to find this, if I brought it with me. It did a series of things with which I want to share with you. First of all, it was the beginning of a great change in America. And that is, it said, look, there is land so valuable to us as humans. As humans. It's valuable to us. It didn't say it was valuable to grizzly bears or wild swans. The import of it, and the hearing records show this, was to people. I think it was a generous act, but it also had this selfish quality to it. We did it for ourselves. A lot of people don't recognize that about wilderness. But the point was, we need these watersheds. We got to have them. Waterfalls and all. We got to protect this stuff if we're going to survive. We need clean water. And it's being dirtied. We think we need grizzly bears and ladybugs alike, because even though we don't understand the ecological balance, we have come to a place with science and our own intuition that says we need these things too. And we may not know exactly why, but let's not do away with any more of them. And it went on that way, right? The Act laid all of this out. The Act specifically created a clear and unambiguous national policy to preserve the public's land. It established a definition of wilderness. It established a wilderness preservation system operated by agencies within the federal government. It set out through those a specific management direction for wilderness. It mandated a review every 10 or 15 or 20 years of landscapes that might potentially have wilderness criteria. So when the first Wilderness Act was passed in 1974, it contained some wilderness acres, but said, but look, there are other wonderful, sparkling, critically important places to humans that might also be designated at a later time. And we thereby set this process in motion, retaining the right for Congress to make the final designation, which was another point of what it did. Only Congress designates. Now, Congress designates with a lot of people input. And I personally think it probably set up the best way to preserve the land in perpetuity, because it's a no-nonsense piece of legislation. Now, some facts about wilderness. There are 758 wilderness areas in America. When passed in 64, there were 54 wilderness areas in America. So 54 to 758. So a lot of new areas. Some of them not very big, but a lot of new areas have been established. states have come to the Congress and say, we got 4 areas we want you to designate wilderness around. And there's a lot of hearings and whatnot. And sometimes it takes a very long time. There hasn't been a new wilderness area in America for 30 years designated. Still a lot of places out there deserve wilderness in my belief, but 30 years, so it takes a long time. Senator Tester has had his bill, which some support and some oppose, but it's got 700, 800,000 acres of wilderness in it. It's been lingering back there in the Senate for, what, 3, 4, or 5 years? Whatever. Takes a long time. At least in contentious places, and I want to talk with you about that. By the way, there are 110 million acres in wilderness now, but half of that's in one place. Where is it? Yeah, Alaska. Yeah, 110 million acres, half of it in one place. Well, that is one state, right? A lot of different wilderness areas up there. Now, compare that half, that 56, 57 million in Alaska with Montana. We have 3 million. And half of that's in one place. Where is it? Huh? Yeah, sort of. The Bob Marshall. Yeah, the Bob Marshall. The front's not in wilderness yet, but it's part of the Bob Marshall, obviously, but not fully protected as it should be. Senator Baucus had a bill for 4 or 5 years to protect it, and it didn't happen. 44 states have wilderness, just kind of an interesting something to know. In the West, there are 557 areas with almost 50 million acres of wilderness here in the West. Most of it in, not all of it by any means, but most of it in the high country, you know, up where we live. Not necessarily just in Montana, but the Wilderness Act, they really got serious. Metcalf and after, the Congress got serious about wilderness and really started getting after it in 1955, 1956, but it took 66 hearings. I think I told you, I thought that was the right number, and I see it here, 66, not hearings, but drafts of wilderness bill. And so hundreds of hearings. And some of them informal. About 20 formal hearings in Washington, D.C., in the House. And we have a thing, another little piece to brag about, and that is the first wilderness to be designated from land that is located on a reservation. That is land that is owned by a tribe, a Native American tribe. So the council said that's wilderness. And it was wilderness just as surely as the United States government would declare it wilderness. Councils have that authority, tribal councils. They're given to it, it was given to them by treaty, right? Treaty rights. Although they had these places in any event. But what tribe was that? Yeah, right. Salish, Kootenai, Pend Oreille, Flathead. We call them all flatheads. I don't know why. You ever seen an Indian with a flathead? I don't know. Let me give you an example of some of the states and their acreage with wilderness. This just sort of sets the compass, you know, so we kind of know where we are and with regard to how we're doing on wilderness or how much wilderness one can expect in a state. Montana has 3 million, a little over that. Arizona has 4. Colorado has 4. Idaho has 5. Washington State has 4. A state the size of ours, about the size of ours. Let's compare apples to apples. Well, California is about the size of ours. Now, we have 3 million. California has 15 million acres of wilderness. Yeah. And a lot of that is because one person in Congress really listened to conservationists in California. His name was Phil Burton, B-U-R-T-O-N. Phil Burton was from San Francisco. Phil Burton was one of the most progressive and productive congressmen of all times, and an absolute crazy man. I loved Phil. We were dear pals. He unfortunately died of a heart attack in midterm back in the 80s, I think. But he insisted, we got to listen to these people that want this, and he overrode the opposition and put an awful lot of this in wilderness through his own ability to get the Congress to support him. So 15 million, but he was doing what people were asking him to do in California. 15 million acres. So Montana has 3.5. What should we have? What's out there that we could really have as wilderness? How many acres have criteria? Well, Montanans have argued about that since 1964. We have 3.5. My own sense is that you could easily, and we have 3.5, you could easily have another 1.5 million. You could easily have 5 in Montana. It wouldn't cost one job. It wouldn't take away one tree. Now you might lock up some gold and silver and copper, because who knows where that is. So you put a mountain in wilderness, you might be locking up the gold. What you have to decide is, as citizens, what's more important? That watershed, that view, that grizzly bear habitat, those squirrels, whatever the hell it is, or gold? You just have to decide that before you even know if there's gold there. And that's the choice. That's what members of Congress have to do, and that's what, you have to decide to ask them to do it, right? But I think there's another 1.5 million acres of wilderness without a big strain. You can't do it without controversy. I found that out. But Montana could get to about 5. We're not going to get to 15 or 12, but in part because of our politics, and in part because most of the criteria for wilderness is in these western mountains where we live. And there's only so much of it. Have you seen the postcard or the big placard that says, you remember that old ad, Got Milk? The milk ad? The bottle of milk, right, that ad? Well, this one says, Got Roads? And it shows all the roads in Montana in red on the map of Montana. If you haven't seen it, it's astonishing. There is no land left without a road. It's incredible. It is. It just stunned me when I was halfway through Montana to find out how many roads there are. So the question is, will Congress put a roaded area in wilderness? And the answer is, that's difficult to get. They won't say no necessarily, but they really take a long look at it and the use of that area. If there's already motorized use in there, Congress is liable to say, no, we don't want a gunfight out there. Let it go. And we are covered with roads. That's why there's probably only 1.5 million acres readily available. Let me go back again a little bit before 1964. What was the genesis of the act? Not a few years before, but way before. Let's say back in the Depression. And FDR and others decided that one of the ways to get young people jobs is to send them out and let them plant trees. Anybody here in the old CCCs? You don't get any hands anymore. Wow. I first got in Congress, I'd say, anybody here from the CCCs? And they wouldn't put their hands up, they'd applaud. And so you'd hear 50 people applauding, I think they've quit coming to meetings. I'm sorry about that. Well, the New Deal had a thing called the Civilian Conservation Corps. They sent hundreds of thousands of young people out into residential, well, they built them cabins. There's still sites in Montana, some of them used a lot, where there are cabins. And the young people would live in the cabins, and they would take care of the land during the day, plant trees. I don't know how many millions of trees they planted, but I used to know, and it's astonishing. They cleared trails, they cleared brush, they put in stone steps and stone walls, and did a lot of work that conservationists thought needed to be done. And maybe some work conservationists had wished hadn't been done, but they were out there. And that created a new ethic in America, because here's several million kids that had seen the land and lived on it, including kids from New York City. Right? And so it gave America a new perspective about the land and the care of the land. It was like, it was somewhat similar to young men and to some degree young women coming home from World War II. For the first time, they had seen the world. First time in American history, Americans had seen the world. For the first time in the lives of a great many young people of white skin, they had seen people of black skin and served with them, or yellow skin, right? They saw people of all different ethnic variety. They saw the world. It changed them. Well, it changed those CCC kids too, I think, with regard to some understanding of the land and some respect for it and understanding that it had to be cared for. But this notion grew out of that time that the land was to be cropped, cut, architecturally designed, which is what these kids were doing in their own way under leadership, right? Mowed. And the notion came along that, no, wait a minute. No, some of this land has to remain the way it is. And it was a great argument and very beneficial to this country. Yeah, it's all right to build some trails and clear them and put some stone steps in and change the wild in many, 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 many places. But what about just leaving it for what it is? Because you go back to some of those CCC camps now and look at what they've done, and part of what they did was wonderful, and part of what they did caused a hell of a lot of erosion in places where it wouldn't have been. And it changed some of the little streams that we needed to flow into the bigger streams and then into the rivers. So we began to see, what would one say, both sides of what was being done there. So people began to go to the Congress. Congress didn't figure this out without people coming to it. I assure you, people got to go to the Congress for the Congress to figure out. You know all those bad bills the Congress passes? Some of them you asked us to do. You got to come to the Congress and ask. You got to come to the Congress and say, do you know what's going on outside of Missoula? Do you know what's going on in Gila Bend? You know what's happening here in Texas? We got to do something about this. And if the Congress has got this listening army out there, this caring army, it'll do right in the main. We're at a terribly dangerous time in America now where America won't go to Congress. It says no use. Well, for a short time it's no use, but hey, don't give up. That'll change. That'll change. People always change this crap. And they will again. And as they came and said, look, we need to leave some of this land alone, which is a terribly contentious and controversial subject in America. Don't do anything with the land. Leave it be. Less controversial now than it was when I served in Congress, but I didn't serve in Congress that long ago. After all, I'm still on this side of the grass. And I'll tell you, when I served there were lots of Montanans that thought just the simple notion, which I think is brilliant, of just let it be. Let it be. Leave the land alone in some places. Nature's doing fine with it, thank you. Get the bulldozer the hell out of here. That was very contentious and controversial. So, now, are there some wild places that maybe ought to be manicured or whatnot because they're close to places that are parks and playgrounds? Yeah, maybe. So we can work all that out as people. But generally, the Congress began to catch on to just leaving it alone, and including Lee and Mike and Arnold Olson and Jim Batten, a Republican from, I think Jim, I didn't know Jim, sorry, Billings, Sorry, I didn't know Jim. I tried to go down a couple of times and meet him when he was a judge. Got appointed judge by President Nixon, and I always wanted to meet him because they tell me what a swell person he was. Batten was a Republican and relatively conservative, not like today, I don't think like today's conservative, but relatively conservative. He put in legislation for more acres of wilderness than Mansfield, Metcalf, or Arnold Olson. All Democrats. Yeah. Jim thought this is the thing to do. See, because it was conservation as the root word is conservative, right? Let's protect this. Let's be careful now. We don't want to do too much. You know, I'm for Butte, and we thought if you didn't hit it with a bulldozer, you weren't improving it. It had to, and Billings had a different idea about that, apparently. Well, let me, do you need a rest from this voice? Are we doing all right? Let me stop there. I've got some more, but if because I want to sort of take you through the wilderness. Let's start taking you through. I want to find my speaker is what I want to, my microphone. I'm going to turn around while I undress. God. You'd think after all these years a guy'd get used to a microphone, but they never. Lee Metcalf, I'm talking about Lee, a lot about Lee today because the subject is wilderness, but Lee used to come up to the, I don't know what I'm doing. Lee used to come up to the podium and he'd say, "Is this thing working?" And Donna, God love her, his wife, Donna would be sitting at the table here, right, wherever. And she'd get up, because he couldn't make it work. He had no idea how the hell to make it work. She'd get up and come up, and she'd push him out of the way. And he'd fiddle with a few dials and say, "There, try that, honey." And she'd go back and sit down, and Lee would give his speech. And I don't know how many times I saw that. And after a while, it got boring. It got like, can't this guy figure this damn stuff out of you? You want a Mike Mansfield story so that we're not overwhelming you with Lee? It says nothing to do with wilderness, and so I'm eating up the time that you see. You paid for this time. You're getting cheated. I mean, you wanted to hear about wilderness. I see a few of you sitting there like, when the hell is he going to get to? And some of them are leaving. So I mean, this is not. It's okay. The delegation said to me, "Would you call Senator Mansfield?" He was ambassador at the time. "Would you call him, Pat, and tell him that we have these plans?" And they had advised Mike that they had these plans to create the library over here on a foundation, a Mike Mansfield Foundation. So they said, "Would you call Mike and tell him we're about to put in legislation and move it quickly to do this?" So I said, all right. So I got the time right, you know, the difference time between Washington. I think I called him from home, if I remember, but in any event, he came on the phone. You remember his voice? See if I can. "Hello, Pat?" I said, "Hey, Mr. Ambassador, it's Mike." "Hey, Mike, how are you?" "I'm good, Pat. How are you?" He'd end up, his voice would go up at the end of a syllable, right? "I'm fine." "How's Butte?" "I hear they're thinking about closing the Berkeley pit." So we talked about that for a while, and then I told him what I was calling about on behalf of the delegation. I said, "So we want to name it the Mike Mansfield Library and Foundation. We just wanted you to know." And he said, "Very kind of you to call, Pat. You want my answer, of course." And I said, "Yes, please." He said, "All right. It's nope. Good to talk to you." And he hung up. This is after some people say, well, he had agreed up until that point, right? So I went to the delegation, and I think I was a freshman. And I told him what he did. I said, Jesus, he hung up on. You know, if he hadn't have been Mike Mansfield, we'd have thought he was rude. Yeah. But he could get away with it somehow. And it wasn't really rude. It was just, you know, whatever the hell it was. Rude sometimes, I guess. Nobody likes to be hung up. And they said, yeah, we knew he was going to do that. That's why we asked you to call it. So we waited a while, and then we thought, oh, we know what the problem is. So I called him back. How are you, Pat? Nice to talk to you again. When did we talk? A month ago. Yeah. He said, well, so what is it this time? And I said, well, it's the same subject. Well, I have the same answer ready. I said, well, just a minute, Mr. Ambassador, Mike. I said, we want to name it the Maureen. And Mike Mansfield Library, and this is his long pause, and the voice came over, that voice, and said, Pat, you got me. That was Mike, right? And those of you who remember him know that that story and dozens of others are very reflective of exactly who this guy was. He was a world-class guy, and at one time, in my opinion, the greatest living American. Okay, let me begin this story for you that takes 30 years. For us, it's only going to take about an hour, but before I go into it, I want to give you time to talk or ask a question. So let's do that for 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll do a half hour and see how far that takes us in the 30-year story up to today. And the 30 years, not since 64, but 30 years, which is from the time I got there, which is what I really know about. I don't know all the inside of how the 64 Act passed. I wasn't there, so I can't, I can tell you what I read. But so, what about it? Questions or things you know? Please.
Most of the acres that could be made into wilderness in western Montana are in Glacier National Park. Why does the National Park Service just not feel it's part of the system?
Yeah, I got your email, by the way. Thank you very much. I enjoyed those cartoons. Look great. And thanks for being here. When I saw when you wrote that question, I began to look at Glacier Park, and I find conflicting statements. One statement is that Glacier Park has been designated. That is, some of the interior, not through normal congressional action, but through the designation of a park action, has been declared wilderness. Then, on the other hand, people say it's not wilderness because the Congress never designated it wilderness. So I think maybe it's a decision for judges. I don't know. The truth is, I don't know.
They want to keep it a playground, but then many wilderness areas are being more heavily used by hikers and backpackers and horsemen.
But they do not allow motorized vehicles in there. They don't allow anything in a lot of those areas that, for example, wouldn't be allowed up here in the rattlesnake wilderness. So they manage it, large portions of it, as wilderness. And I think the same is true in Yellowstone as I've been digging around. But I really appreciated you doing that because in the email and then being here, because I want to know that myself and see if we need to do something. Thanks. Anybody else, please?
What's going on with the fracking? Why don't they expose a lot more about it?
Yeah.
Like, the gas industry can do whatever they want.
No.
And they are not. I mean, ingredients is acid they're blowing down. Why isn't that exposed?
Well, I think it is. That's how we know about it. We know that fracking's a potential problem, and I think proven to have been a problem in some places. So there is I think there's some exposure of it going on. I don't know, if it's enough and if it's alarming.
Bank loan. The Bank of Montana wanted a water sample where I live.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the banks know.
Right, they know, yeah. Yeah, good point.
We don't pay right now, but.
Hope so. Well, Montana is one of those states, and I say this with being a Butte guy who always thought jobs were really important. Montana really has been a state, I think we're leaving that time now, where jobs came first, period. And for more than a century, timber, copper, gold, silver,
little bit of oil and gas, but timber, copper, gold and silver were king. They were above everything. They even had the right of eminent domain over people. Interestingly enough, oil companies maintain that right today. I don't know if people understand this. People in Montana are beginning to. An oil company can come up to your place, cut the lock, open the gate, and come in with a drilling rig. Why? Because they own the mineral rights under your place. And they cannot be stopped from getting it. So I went back to see Senator Tester one time, and I said, John, I took out a map of Montana. I said, do you know that the companies have this right? He said, I don't think so, Pat. He later, he understood it, not because, but because he did a lot of work on it, and then he really understood it better than I did. But I showed him the map, and I said, look, just pick a place. And I had practiced a few times, so I was able to put my finger on his farm. I said, look, that's private land. They can come right in there. And he said, Jesus Christ, that's my farm. I said, and they'll cut your lock and come in, John, and you can't stop them because I happen to know they own the mineral rights under your farm. And he looked at an aide and said, prepare me some stuff on this. Now, I don't know what happened from there. I didn't bug him, but I do know nothing's been done about it. And it's not an issue with the exception of Udall in Colorado. He's making a big issue, and he's having trouble getting reelected because he's making it such a big issue. That is, he's trying to stop it from happening. And I wish the Montana delegation would do the same, frankly. People have a right to their property, I understand that, but
Democrat Congressman Denver from
from Denver, yeah, he did. Is he a Democrat? Yeah, well, he's close to somebody. Anything else? Please.
Do you have any comments on the half-earth philosophy, the half-earth movement?
I don't know it. Half Earth, like 0.5?
They want to designate or try to get corridors for animals, like from the Rocky Mountains all the
Oh,
way
yeah,
down.
corridors. Yeah.
And whether it's privately owned or,
Right. The one I know about is called Y to Y, Yellowstone to the Yukon.
that's
Yeah.
also part of the philosophy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I may not be for all that would happen under that, taking a private property or whatnot, but generally, yeah, I'm for that.
People putting private property into
Yeah,
voluntarily.
voluntarily. And so if it's done right, I'm for it. Animals got to move. They just got to move. And I think we have to come to two things as I think we're all conservationists here, and I don't mean we've taken sides in all this. I just think Montanans generally are conservationists, and a lot of you may think there's enough wilderness now, and we got to care for it, and that's fine. And some of you may be opposed to any of it, but I think generally, with regard to caring for the land, most people you run into in Montana are conservationists. There are obvious exceptions. I think conservationists have to come to two new understandings. One is, you can't draw a line around Yellowstone and say, okay, that's it. Wolves, you see the do not pass sign? You can't do it. Yeah, the bison, you can't. What are we, crazy? You can't do that. You can't draw a line and say that's it, nothing's allowed outside of it. So we have to come to that, and we have to create corridors. We have to leave corridors alone. Now, these are not corridors that are someday going to be industrialized or we're going to put residents there. For the most part, that's not a problem in Montana. We're still fairly wide open, and in these mountains there are natural corridors. And we've got to have them all the way from the deserts through the mountains, across Canada and up to the Yukon. I think so. The other thing I think conservationists have to begin to come to is the notion of quiet. You can't have a lot of noise in these places. Now, some people think, well, that's pretty extreme. And I don't know, maybe it is, but there are some places that are meant for solitude and quiet. And a lot of people go up into the Rattlesnake to get the hell away from all the noise, right? Well, I think wilderness entitles them to that. And I don't know if it needs legislation, but boy, I've been in a hell of a lot of noisy wilderness areas. I was in Glacier Park. In fact, I did a commentary last night on KUFM. Some of you may have heard it. And I'm up there with the director of the Park Service, and I'm trying to convince him that we got to stop helicopters from flying below those peaks and up in those valleys. And he and I are walking along. Kennedy was his name. We're walking along, and I'm, telling him what the problem is, and he was very good about it, but he knew what a struggle it would be, and he was taking on a political battle, and he thought he'd have to go and get presidential permission, because it'd be such a fight. I didn't think it was that big a fight, but he was sort of with it. And I'm trying to convince him, and all of a sudden we hear pop, 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 pop. And over the ridge, I mean, you could see the faces in the chopper. And it came by and went over the other ridge, and it absolutely startled Kennedy. I mean, it just almost knocked him off his feet because it's so loud and unexpected. And after he recovered, he said, "You hired that guy." I didn't, but I thought, damn, that would have been a good thing to do.
What are your thoughts on the pipeline? I haven't heard much lately about that.
Yeah, the pipeline coming down from Canada. It's good to see you, sweetheart. How's he doing? Yeah. Tell him I forgot to call him back. He called me the other day. I forgot to, because I'm just now reminding myself when I see you. I'm torn about the pipeline. Yeah. This may be the wrong crowd to say that to, but I'm a little, yeah, I know. I'm torn about it because I don't know enough about it. Is that stuff, and boy, it's bad stuff, is that stuff really coming out of there regardless? And if it is, then which is the best way to do it? Now, should it come out? No, I don't think so. I don't think that fuel ought to come out of there. But it's coming out. I mean, if you serve in Congress, you get real rational about this stuff. So the question is, what's the best way to get it out if it is coming? And I got to be truthful, I don't know. I don't know whether rail cars or oil. What bothers me is we're going to get none of it. It ain't going to benefit us. They're going to put a few dozen people to work on the pipeline, a few dozen people on the ships to take the fuel elsewhere. By the way, the coal cars that come through here? Where 6 out of 10 of them are headed and burned? Portland. How's that for a... Yeah, how's that? Well, the thing is there, and they send it out to other places. But it goes to the port in Portland. And Oregon was on coal for quite a while and trying to get off. Yeah. So this is interesting. In fact, so, it's like the coal trains. See, what people really want to do is stop fossil fuels, and so do I. The question is, what's the best way to do it? You can't stop it on Wednesday. 60%, these lights are on coal. The university on coal, I forget. 60% of what we are using is coal. Well, you can't stop that immediately. You've got to get off it. And that's what Schweitzer was always talking about, although he thought there could be clean coal, which is saying they're going to be sober Irishmen. I mean, I'm Irish. Clean coal, it's not going to happen. But Brian really was after alternative energy. That's really what his big thing was. And he got some of it done, but it's a 20, 25-year thing. That's what we ought to be after is alternative energy. And put those sites up and make them, the federal government ought to be pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into subsidy for alternative energy. Amen. Yeah, that's how you do it. Yeah. I mean, if we pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the coal companies and the oil companies to stay on fossil fuel, why the hell don't we stop that, let them compete with alternative energy that is subsidized? Amen. We've done it the other way around for 100 years. All right, okay, all right. I know a punchline when I see one, I'll tell you. Anything else before we take off? Sure.
Have you seen the series House of Cards?
I've never watched it. I hear it's great. Well, the Clintons are friends of Carol and I, just because we served back there, and Carol had a group that Hillary belonged to, and a group called Peace Links that some of you who know Carol remember. So we got close. I got close to them because of Carol, really. But the president and I were friends when he was in Arkansas. So they watch it all the time. They never miss it. And if they miss it, they have it on the disc. And I asked him about it, and he said, "It's absolutely real." I said, "You think so?" He said, "Oh, it's absolutely, Pat." And I said, "How do you know?" He was never in the Congress. Bill Clinton ran for the Congress and got beat. Yeah, before he became president. He was never. I said, "How do you know what goes on Capitol Hill?" "Well, that's not a bad point," he said. Hillary was up there more than he was on trying to do health care, you know. Seriously, he's the only person I've talked to about it. Do you think it seems real? Yeah. Yeah, it's correct. Okay. Congress is not, you're all going to get up and leave. Congress is not a wheeler-dealer corrupt place. It's not. Even today, it's not. It's now filled with a bunch of people who think they shouldn't do anything because the country goes to hell if you pass laws. That's a strong minority that stops you from doing anything there. I'm in the middle of writing a column about it for the papers. It's not corrupt. I never had one single time anybody ever came to me and offered me a damn thing to vote one way or another. And I was there 18 years. And I voted 4,000 times or something. Never. Now, do we scratch each other's back? If you'll vote for mine, I'll vote for yours. Even though I don't like yours, I'll hold my nose because I got to have a vote for Montanans. Yeah, we do that. Yeah, we do that. But you never vote for anything, at least I never did, that I thought was going to be, you know, create a real problem in America just to get that guy to vote with me or that gal. I don't think, here, I'll tell you what I think the biggest problem in Congress is. Well, I can't say the biggest problem because I'd have to be partisan. But, see, there's too many of one kind of people back there, that's what I think. But I'm going to, now I'm not pandering to the ladies here. I'm not. I have given this same remark to Kiwanis and Rotary for 20 years. You really want to change the Congress? You really want a grassroots change in the Congress? Elect more women. Yeah, yeah. No kidding. I'm convinced that would change the Congress, and I think, not convinced, but I think it would change it significantly for the better rather quickly. Women don't want to fight with each other. Well, except Carol. No, Carol never fights with anybody. She just convinces them. Women don't want to fight with anybody. Women don't want to do anything that seems mean-spirited. Most women. That's how I find it. Yeah, I could be wrong about all this opinion stuff. But let me give you one example, and then, sir, I'll take your question, and I'll go on with the lecture. Here's an example of how women are different in the Congress than men. I was on the education committee for you all those years, and I sat in a hearing one time about school buses. So the guys all asked the size of the tires and the displacement of the engine, and going on about it. They were talking about stuff I didn't even get. These guys were real mechanics at home, apparently, these members of Congress. And there was a woman, oh hell, I'm forgetting her name. Of course, I forget the name of the guys too now. But there was a woman in there, Republican woman from the Northeast, a wonderful gal. And she waited, as women will. Finally got called on. And she said, "Why are there no seat belts on school buses?" And something went off in my head that said, ding, 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 ding. And it wasn't a school bell. It was some people, because of their life experiences, see things entirely different than other people. I think the way you clean up Congress and you get at real issues, down-to-earth real issues that people worry about in their houses, and I think the way you stop this pulling the trigger all the time around the world and spending trillions in places like you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, and then you say, oh God, that was a big mistake. Now we're in there for 30 more years, is women. Women don't like that stuff. They don't like those toys that us guys like so much. So, anyhow. You okay, fellas? Too close? I hope not. I know guys are really coming around. Okay. Let me start this story, and then I'll try to leave 5 or 6 minutes at the end for more questions, all right? I got to Congress in you all elected me in 78. And so I began my term in December, like 20th of 79. That's when you start. And at that same time, the President and the Congress were presented, primarily by the Forest Service, with a study. And the study was called Roadless Area Review and Evaluation. And it went by the acronym RARE. And it was called 2 because there had been 2 of them. So RARE 2 came to each state that had had a review by the Forest Service of its public lands. And the part of the purpose of the review, which was very significant, a study and review evaluation by the Forest Service, was to determine whether there were what lands were out there that might have had wilderness criteria characteristics, but was never declared wilderness. And so those studies went to Carter. He changed a few of them, which was within the president's power, and he sent them up to Congress same time I arrived. And so Congress, on my first day, in effect, was challenged, had the greatest challenge that was ever placed before it to what is usually referred to as complete the wilderness inventory. I had known that it had gone to the president, and the proposal in front of the president for Montana was, I think I'm right about this, 600,000 acres of new wilderness. They said Montana contains land that's never been declared wilderness. We've got all the characteristics of it, about 600,000 acres. And I remember being asked about that by the press as a candidate, and a much younger guy than I am now with a lot less experience than I have now. And I said, I had looked at it for a bit, and talked to some people. I said, oh, I think 600,000's high. I don't think we need that much more wilderness in Montana, but I said, you know, I'm new to this. Hey, I got to go back there and look at it and see where it takes us. When I got back there, I got on what in those days was called the Interior Committee and is now called Natural Resources. And then within the Interior Committee, I got on the Subcommittee for Public Lands, which has the starting jurisdiction for all wilderness proposals. So I was on the subcommittee. I got to have my voice there and my vote there on your behalf. And then I was also a member of the full committee, because you can't, you have to be both. So I was a member of the full Natural Resources Committee, the Subcommittee on Public Lands. So I was going to have a lot to say about wilderness in Montana. And I was going to have more to say about it than my colleague and friend from eastern Montana, back when Montana had 2 members of Congress. His name, as many of you recall, was Ron Marlene. Ron lives in Bozeman. He and I never see each other anymore, but we are friends. And we had that great go-round in 92, I think it was, where Montana went down to 1 member of Congress, and you closed your eyes and pointed at somebody, and when you opened your eyes, it was me. And I defeated Marlene, and then I became the only member of the House from Montana. But in those days, there were 2 of us. Ron said to me, I don't want to get involved much in this wilderness stuff, because I hardly have any of it out here. So even though we're both on the Natural Resources Committee, I'll kind of follow your lead, and we'll see where it goes. At the time, my wife's brother, deceased now, a young guy drowned in the Big Hole River. But he was I tell you this because it's part of the story, of wilderness. He was operating a hydraulic shovel in the Berkeley Pit in Butte. I don't know if any of you have seen those shovels, but it could gobble this room in 2 bites. Enormous, enormous shovel with enormous power. That shovel put 300 miners out of work. Because, you know, miners used to work. I was a miner. We worked with the delivery platform wasn't a big scoop. It was a little thing like that with a stick on the end of it called a shovel. And we could hardly get anything done. Really. I mean, it's amazing to me they put 3,000 to 8,000 miles of tunnels under Butte because they were operating with this little equipment, right? Drills and dynamite too. You know where the Mansfield's term tapper light comes from? You drill a hole and you put dynamite in and you shove it down with a stick and then you tap the stick. Mike could say tapper light. That's where that came from. Copper, gold, timber, as I said, were king. At the beginning of my career, they were king. But some of us could politically, economically, culturally smell a change. There was something changing out here. And I mean, that shovel that Bobby operated put 300 miners out of work. Well, then that's going to change the economy. Isn't Butte going to start saying, wait a minute, copper's not that important to this city? Well, of course they are. When the thing was invented, I forget what they call it, that walks through the forest and snips a tree, locks it over to another arm, the other arm delimbs it, and throws it in a truck or on a pile? Feller buncher. What it really is a feller out of work, right? Putting a lot of people out of work. Well, that changes the economy, and that changes politics. If you no longer have those 15,000 miners in Butte saying, you're back there to protect mining, Williams, that changes everything. So we began to, it didn't happen overnight, and you know, most of us are too damn dumb to get it right away, but you began to sniff that there was something else going on. And after a few years, I began to write about one of the most, what I thought was one of the most significant transitions in American history. And you all lived through it. The Rocky Mountain West went from an extractive economy to something else. And I don't think we've named it yet after all these years, 30 years. But a conservation economy, an appreciation economy, a tourist economy. And, you know, it's not quite that. But you see what I'm saying? So we went from one kind of a place to a different kind of place, and we did it dramatically within about a decade and a half. Bobby went out of work. He was out of work. Not just because of the transition, but he was out of work suddenly. So not only were the other 300 guys out of work, Anaconda left Butte, Bobby was out of work too. So all of that political force from the natural resource economy and companies began to dissipate dramatically in Montana and in many places in the Rocky Mountain West. So I started to say to myself and to others who were kind enough to come and talk to me about this stuff, we have to promote something else in Montana. And as a member of Congress, I only have a small piece of that, but in some ways it can be a large piece if done right. If explained to people that, look, here's what's happening. And more important, to legislate in a way that reflects what the hell's happening. And so I focused my time on the committee in protecting the land in Montana because I was a tree hugger? Jesus, I'm from Butte. No, it was about the economy to me. It was about jobs. Different jobs. Different jobs. Jobs in the fly fishing shops, jobs in the restaurants, jobs in the motel, jobs in the Forest Service. It goes on and on and on. And you've benefited from it. I tell you that because that was at the core. It took a few years, but that was at the core of me being the first, and I'm going to toot my own horn here. I'm trying to put it in a historical context. I was the first congressman in Montana history that was moved by a transition like that. I stood in one place when I got elected and a different place by the time I was a sophomore or a junior. Yeah. And I was the first one in, the first one in Montana history, not because I was smarter than the rest of them. They didn't live in this time frame. Arnold Olson didn't live in this time frame. Mike Lee, the rest of them. Lee was ahead of his time too, or he was ahead of his time. But he was still, he still had a lot of legislation out there for jobs and increasing access and the rest of it as well. And I don't take my own personal credit for this. It was you all and the economy that made me say, God, I think real leadership is going to be to move over here. So as an example, and I really am embarrassing myself because I'm going on too long about this part, but I think it's important to the transition thing. I was the first and only congressman in Montana history to kill a major dam in this state. There was a dam called the Libby Re-Regulating Dam, $300 million. One of the largest dams to be built, well, the largest dam to be built in America then or since. And I looked at it, and it would be a whole class to go through this with you, but I looked at it along with my staff and some other hydrological and energy experts and said, this is yesterday. This is where Montana thought it was going. That's not where we're going at all. We're going to smaller energy projects, right? And we got to recognize that big timber companies and big aluminum companies are going to go away. They're not going to need this. It's too expensive on the taxpayer, so I killed it. And was almost convinced that it would kill me, because it's not what jobs Democrats, right, did in Montana history. It didn't do that. And when I thought it was going to kill me, and I say it almost did, it certainly did in Libby. To this day, Libby and Lincoln County vote Republican. Always before that, they voted Democrat. I feel bad about that. But it does indicate to you where the shift was, right? But as they say, enough about me. I changed as you changed. That's the point. Let me make a leap here. By the way, we're scheduled but not required to finish up here in about 10 minutes, at least by my watch. And as people have to leave, please do it. But I would like to go on for at least 5 minutes and get into the details of some of the early stuff. And what I'm going to give you is the color, not the bill numbers and the rest of it. I may end with this story. In my classes here, I scatter stories, because I think it's a good way for facts to stick to your ribs, memory. So here's a story. That rare two came to us, the review and evaluation, right, from the Forest Service. And I was on the committee that had to deal with it, so I decided to take it out and have a hearing on it. But I didn't want to have a hearing on all the wilderness areas proposed or suggested in Montana, the new wilderness that they found, characteristics. So I did one. And I thought, let's see, where am I going to do it? Well, I ought to do it where there's a timber mill. And there were a lot of timber mills in Montana. But I also want to temper the timber mill thing with a place where they teach forestry and there's a school. So I thought, Missoula. And then I thought, nah, the rest of Montana won't go for that. You know how those Missoula people are. liberal, Democrat, whatever they are. So, which is, by the way, a misunderstanding of Missoula. It really is. And remember Jack Mudd, the name Jack Mudd? Jack was a wonderful lawyer in town. He's now the lawyer for the hospital. The nurses run their hospital, Providence, is that what it's called? He's now their lawyer in the nation and works out of Spokane, I think. Jack was wonderful. He ran against Conrad Burns. Burns came that close to beating Jack in Jack's hometown of Missoula. So this is not an automatic crazy liberal. That's not what happens here. It's a very thoughtful place. But I thought, nah, people won't buy that, so I'll go somewhere else. Well, the other place I found with a university and timber, both pretty important to the town, was Dillon. So I'll have it in Dillon. It's a nice little town, and we'll go. So I go to Dillon. First, I go to the chairman of the committee, Morris Udall. Do you remember the name Morris Udall? Mo Udall was one of the great House members, congressmen in history. People don't remember House members. They remember senators. But Mo Udall was a fantastic guy. He was a pro basketball player before there were real pro teams. But he played basketball on a pro team, and he lost one eye when he was a little kid, and so he had a false eye, and he was about 6'6" or so, and he was skinny as a rail. He was a Mormon, and he had arthritis. And he used to go to his constituents and say, when was the last time a one-eyed, 6'6" Mormon with arthritis asked for your vote? I never knew what it meant, but it was funny as hell the way he said it, right? I said, Mr. Chairman, would you even consider coming to Montana? He said, what for? I said, a wilderness hearing. He said, you're damn right. And the reason, I later learned, was Montana was so important to the nation with regard to environmental care and environmental leadership. He said, you put it together, you tell me when it is, I'll cancel stuff at home to be out there, Pat. So out he came, and we flew into Billings on the Delta or something, and we got on a little plane to go into Dillon, which has an airport, but they only, little private planes. I think this was a Forest Service plane. And Udall had just run for president against Jimmy Carter in the primaries. Of course, Carter beat him. But Udall did really well in the primaries. And he ran second in a lot of places. And I think maybe he ran first somewhere. But anyhow, Carter, as you know. And so everybody knew Mo Udall. The same way they know John McCain now. Another, lost candidate. Udall got on the plane, and they had that purple curtain over the cockpit, and he was a friendly, and he reached his big long arm in the cockpit, and he said, hiya, fellas, I'm Mo Udall. Well, they were excited. They're genuinely excited. They knew they were flying Mo Udall and some other congressman from Montana, but they were really excited about meeting you. Oh, they turned around and they talked to him. He kept talking and talking and talking, and they kept talking. And pretty soon I noticed they started to fiddle with the instruments. And because they knew what I knew, but Mo didn't know it, and that was there's a storm coming into Dillon, and we had to take off from Billings. But Udall was paying no attention. He was just going on and on. This was a twin-engine. This was a twin-engine plane. And so I'm about to tap him on the shoulder, but I'm afraid of him. He's the chairman of the committee. I was a young guy. I was a freshman. So I kind of leaned in a little bit, and Udall sort of caught that he had to start winding the conversation down. So he said to them, fellas, I'm a single-engine pilot myself. Well, of course, that starts a whole new conversation. And one of the guys, I think the pilot, that chief guy, turned around and looked at him and said, is that right, Congressman? Well, that's just wonderful. Now, I'll tell you what. You go back there, and you guys strap yourself in. And if we lose one of these engines, I'll call you. Mo went back with his big long legs stuck out, and I heard him click the thing into himself. He said, boy, we all need a little of that shit once in a while. We get to Dillon, and the sheriff, Buzzy, meets us at the airport, and he's got 3 deputies with him, which means the whole damn county sheriff's office is there at the airport. And I introduced him to Udall and to go around, and so I go back to get in my car, which a friend had driven down from an office I had in Butte. Patty Shea's his name. I tried to hire a Finlander, but you can't do it in Butte. You got to hire an Irishman, Patty Shea. And Patty had the car there, so Patty had the door open for Mo and the door open for me, and we started to get in it, and then something happened that you never want to have happen to you, and that is that the sheriff stood between us and the car and said, no, fellas, you're coming with me. I said, Buzzy, we got to go. No, don't argue with me, Congressman. Mr. Chairman, Congressman, come on. So we got in, and about 2 blocks later, we realized why. And that is, I thought we had entered a parade. There were people on the streets, 3 or 4 deep, for about 3 blocks, with signs. No more wilderness. Not another inch, Pat. Welcome, Mr. Chairman, but the answer is no. And there were a few bottles that were flung. And then we had cop cars around us. I thought it was overdone, but, you know, small town, chairman of the committee, new congressman coming, they got to protect him. They took us up the fire escape to get into the auditorium at Western, on the campus at Western. And when we entered, the place was jammed to the top and people outside waiting, right? So we entered the stage area, and about 2/3 of the people there stood up and booed like hell. And about 1/3 applauded. They told me later that they had confiscated, and I've forgotten the number now, but it was pretty impressive, like 6 guns and 40 or 50 knives at the door. That's not bad for Dillon. Except a couple of the guns were loaded. That was a little... We listened to testimony and raucous applause or raucous boos for about 2.5, 3 hours. And it was probably 80% against wilderness near Dillon. Now, they had a mill there. So my proposal, and they knew what my proposal was. I had put in a bill before the hearing, you see, so we'd have something to have a hearing on. And the bill was front page of the paper, and it took some harvest away from them. Harvest that they should never have on the face of this mountain that looks down on the Bitterroot Valley. You shouldn't scar that up with clear cuts and roads. And the Forest Service said to me, look, we got to go ahead with this unless somehow you can protect this area. The only way to protect it was primarily wilderness, other than fighting every clear cut or fighting every timber. So it was jobs. See, we were going to close the mill and it was jobs. I assured them that because of the way wilderness acts work, and that is you put so much in wilderness, and then you take all of the rest of what you considered, and you say to the Forest Service, here, use it for multiple use. And then some of that is harvested. See, that's multiple use. The wilderness is set aside, the land, what you call released, back to the Forest Service, is harvested. So I assured them that, look, if this wilderness bill doesn't pass, your mill as it stands today is a goner. And that was because the courts, I don't want to get too tangled in this, but the courts had locked up all of the land that was studied under Rare 2. Not just the wilderness acreage, all of it. And they said, we're locking up all of it to give the Congress the opportunity to designate which areas should be wilderness. Well, that was kind of reasonable. We're going to give the Congress time to think about this. Congress needs time. So all this stuff was off limits to timbering. My point was, look, we'll put a little wilderness on the side of that mountain, a couple other places, and the rest of it you'll be free to go get under the environmental rules of the Forest Service. They wouldn't have it. They wouldn't listen. Today, that mill is probably a tenth of what it was. And no wilderness down there, but locked up. Still. So that was Dillon. The last witness to come in front of us was an old guy from Dillon. He had big red lumber suspenders. And well, when we had people testify, we had chosen them. We called the timber industry and we said, pick 10 people you want. And we called the environmentalists and said, pick 10 people you want. And we called the city Chamber of Commerce, you get 10, and so on and so forth. So we had, several dozens of people that were there. All right. Then Mo Udall says, well, that's not really the fairest way. So in all of his hearings, the chairman used to have like what he called the Udall Minute. And that was, look, we've got 3 microphones that we've set up here. And he'd have the student interns do it. And Dylan, they'd set the microphones up. And he said, now, if you want to talk, you have 1 minute each. He said, hell, I don't care if you go on 10 minutes, but the people behind you care that are waiting to speak, right? They're all lined up. So you get 1 minute. It's called the Udall 1 minute. So, Jesus, I don't know, probably 100 people lined up, different, 30 at each mic or something. And the last guy to get up, walk to the front when we thought we were done, was this guy with the suspenders. And he turned to the crowd and he said, now the reason I'm telling you this part of the story is so that you'll understand the misunderstanding that thousands of Montanans had about what we were trying to do, about what wilderness does, okay? This guy stood up and he turned to the crowd and he said, well, you all know me. And I don't want to diminish this guy, but people in the crowd were looking at him like, who the hell are you? You know that guy? He comes to every meeting, you know that. You all know me. And he turned around, honest God, tucked his thumbs under and said, I'm a conservative. And I just don't want to be seeing the federal government coming out here and telling us what we can do and what we can't do. But the real reason I'm a conservative is because of finances and the way the federal government spends money. And so here's my question, and I would like both of you to answer it. How much, if you do this crazy wilderness thing out here on the west Big Hole, mountain range down there, how much is it going to cost the federal government for barbed wire and bricks? He turned around and started to go back to his seat. And Udall said, sir. The guy finally turned around and Udall said, would you come back to the microphone, please? And the guy came back, said, yes. Udall said, what barbed wire and bricks? What are you talking about? And the guy said, well, you're going to construct around there to keep us out. And the crowd yelled, yeah, how much is that going to cost? And they applauded this guy. We want some more time. We want to know what this is going to cost. We want to know where you get the right to put up barbed wire. We're like, Jesus Christ. No kidding. Now, these are people, these very people are people who love the Barb Marshal. Right? But suddenly, a guy named Ronald Reagan was about to be president. America had shifted what they thought about the federal government. All old bets were off and all new bets were on. And people who lived in this state thought we were going to fence them out of wilderness, even though they had it, and a lot of it. They had 3 million acres of wilderness then. Now it's like 3.4 or something. They had wilderness. So the hair on the back of my neck went up, and I thought, wow, I don't get it. I'm out of my league here. So we got back to Washington. This is the end of the story, and I went up to Udall about 10 days later, and I said, Mr. Chairman, I'd thanked him for coming out and all, and I said, will you come out to Montana with me? And he said, that's a good one. I've been to Montana, Pat. Maybe you don't remember. And I said, you know that old thing in the West? Mo was a Westerner, Arizona. I said, you know that old thing in the West about getting bucked off the horse? You got to get back on? He said, yeah. I said, well, let's get back on. I'm going to put in another wilderness bill, this time for the rattlesnake north of Missoula. And I'd like you to come to Missoula. It's a little different than Dillon, and we'll have another hearing. And Mo came out to Missoula, and although we were picketed by snowmobilers and a few contractors who wanted to get land up there, at that time it was all checkerboarded up there. The Montana Power Company owned about half of it, and they were going to sell it. We had a good hearing, very thoughtful. no taunts, no screams, no hollers, really good hearing here in Missoula. Mo went away with a very good feeling that Montana may not be, and I'm not criticizing Dylan here. I spent 6, 8, 10 months in school down there. It's where I got my major in education after a couple of other majors that I haven't used much. And so I really like Dylan. But the point is, the crowd down there, a lot of them brought in, was pretty disagreeable, 2/3 of them. But Mo got to see that there was a lot of variety in Montana, and that people were absolutely committed to their ownership of federal land, which is really good. It's just that in Montana and some other western states, they wanted entirely different uses of that land. Down there, it was timber. Up here, it was watershed. The Missoula's where the rattlesnakes where we got our water in those days. And it still helps fill this wonderful aquifer out here. So he got a look not only at sort of Hang 'em High, Montana, but a river runs through it, Montana, which are 2 different places, and there are probably 10 different places in a state like this. Well, can I stop there for some questions? I didn't get very far into the story, but we'll continue it. Any questions that you're dying to ask before we leave? I know I've worn you out. Anybody? Thanks for coming. Yes? Yeah, right. Told them the hardware store wouldn't be able to find enough because we were going to. Thank you.